Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the concept of emotional intelligence, or EI for short. We're going to be looking at the book you sent over, Working with Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, this one's really got me thinking about, how emotions play into success, in work, in relationships, even our health.
Yeah. And, one of the things that really stood out to me in this book is how it kind of challenges how we traditionally think about intelligence, We
Right.
always think about like IQ tests or, academic achievements. But Goleman's saying that emotions play a much bigger role in shaping our lives than we may realize.
It really makes you rethink what it means to be smart, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And Goldman starts the book off with this really captivating story about a New York City bus driver
Oh, yeah.
who manages to create this really positive atmosphere on his bus, even in the middle of all that crazy city traffic.
Right.
Like, how does
Yeah.
he do it,
I
right?
know, it's amazing. And it really gets to the heart of his argument, right? That traditional measures of intelligence, like IQ, they don't tell the whole story when it comes to success in life.
Yeah, especially in areas like leadership or building strong relationships.
Right.
So it's not about like ditching IQ or anything, but more about recognizing that EI,
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence, is like a different type of intelligence altogether.
Yeah,
And it can be even more crucial in certain areas of our lives.
absolutely.
Kind of makes you wonder why we don't focus more on developing these emotional skills.
That's right. I know. It's like, why isn't this taught in school?
Right.
And the thing is, this isn't even a new idea.
Really?
Yeah, even Aristotle, way back in ancient Greece, talked about how important it is to manage your emotions.
Huh.
Goleman's work builds on this. It kind of shows us how our understanding of emotions has, like, evolved over time.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize there was such a long history. So let's dive into Goleman's 5 domains of emotional intelligence then.
Mm.
It's not just about being like nice or touchy-feely. There's like an actual structure to it.
There
Right?
is.
Yeah.
So he breaks it down into 5 key areas: self-awareness, managing emotions,
Okay.
self-motivation, empathy, and handling relationships.
Got it.
And each of these plays a critical role in how we, navigate the world and interact with others.
I love that. It's like a toolkit for your emotions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got these 5 domains, but how do our emotions actually, like, work? Goleman talks about this thing called neural hijacking,
Yeah.
where emotions basically, like, hijack our thinking. What's that all about?
Right. It sounds kind of scary, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
But basically what he means is that strong emotions can trigger a reaction in our brains
Mhm.
before we even have a chance to think things through rationally.
Oh, so it's like you're not even thinking, you're just reacting.
Exactly. And that's where
Yeah.
emotional intelligence comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's about learning how to manage those emotional responses so you don't get swept away.
So we're not just slaves to our emotions.
Exactly. And he explains this using the science of the brain, too. The amygdala.
Refresh my memory.
Right. So the amygdala, it's part of the brain that's basically the alarm system for our emotions.
Hmm.
And sometimes it can react faster than our logical thinking.
It's like that fight or flight
Yeah.
response, right?
Exactly.
And to really like drive this point home, Goleman shares this really interesting case study about a guy named Elliot who had brain surgery for a tumor.
Right.
And after the surgery, his personality totally changed.
Yeah, he couldn't make decisions anymore.
Really?
He couldn't connect with his emotions.
Wow. So it's like emotions are actually essential for like everyday functioning.
Absolutely. They're not just about feeling happy or sad. Emotions actually help us figure out what's important. They guide our decision making.
It's like we totally take them for granted.
We do.
But it's not all about our brains, right? Goleman also talks about how our childhood experiences play a huge role in how we understand and manage emotions later in life.
Yeah, he talks about how early childhood is like a training ground for our emotional intelligence.
Interesting.
He mentions this simple test. It's called Dr. Brazelton's block test, where they give a baby some blocks and see how they react. It shows how those early interactions with caregivers can actually shape a child's emotional foundation.
It's like those early experiences are so foundational.
You really are.
And building on that foundation, Goleman goes on to explore the idea of empathy.
Yeah, which he sees as the root of compassion and altruism.
And I remember he even gives examples of empathy in the animal kingdom,
Yeah.
right? Like those rhesus monkeys who respond to each other's fear.
Right. It challenges that whole idea that humans are the only ones with complex emotions.
Totally. And he ties this back to how empathy develops in children,
Mm.
right? And how it's connected to moral development. So it's not just about feeling sorry for someone. It's about understanding their perspective.
Exactly, and then taking action based on that understanding.
Right. It's about taking action. It really makes you think about how we can foster more empathy in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Especially with, everything going on right now.
Yeah, there's so much division.
So to navigate that world effectively, Goleman talks about, the importance of managing relationships. He really dives into the complexity of human interaction and the roles of emotional awareness and regulation. He even talks about the differences in communication styles between men and women.
Oh, yeah, like that whole stonewalling thing.
Yeah, where men just shut down emotionally during arguments. Gosh, I've definitely seen that one play out. But, I think just being aware of those patterns
Yeah.
can help us break out of those cycles.
Absolutely. And Goleman doesn't just point out the problems. He gives solutions, too. He talks about how to communicate more effectively,
Mhm.
listen actively, to find those win-win solutions that can strengthen relationships.
Yeah, like we're not all doomed to repeat those same patterns.
Right. And you remember that story about the guy, Terry, who sees this incredible act of empathy on the train?
Yes, I loved that story.
It's such a powerful example of how empathy can bridge divides and create connection, even in the most unexpected places. And speaking of unexpected places, Goleman also takes us into the workplace and explores the consequences of low EI.
Right, and that case study about the airline pilot, Melbourne McBroom,
Oh, yeah.
was pretty intense.
It was. It really showed how critical EI can be, especially in those high-stakes environments.
It was a stark reminder of how much our emotions can impact not just ourselves, but everyone around us.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah. And in any workplace, giving and receiving feedback effectively is so important. Goleman offers advice on how to give constructive criticism without being overly critical.
It's about finding that balance between honesty and empathy, right?
Exactly. And Goleman doesn't stop there. He takes us beyond relationships in the workplace and dives into the link between our emotions and our physical health.
That mind-body connection.
Yeah, that was eye-opening. He talks about the research on chronic anger, anxiety, and loneliness, and the health risks associated with those emotions. It really makes you realize that taking care of our emotional health is just as important as taking care of our physical health.
Couldn't agree more. And he also talks about the healing power of emotional support and sharing our feelings.
Right, it's not just about venting. He talks about James Pennebaker's research, which shows that writing about traumatic experiences can actually be beneficial.
Oh, yeah, like a form of emotional processing that can boost our immune system.
It's incredible how much our emotions can affect our physical well-being.
It really is. And there's that study by Dr. David Spiegel that found that support groups could actually have a positive impact on survival rates for women with breast cancer.
Wow, the power of connection.
It's amazing.
So we've covered a lot of ground. The 5 domains of EI, the impact of emotions on our brains, our relationships, our work, even our health. So where do we go from here?
Well, Goleman then shifts his focus to the future of emotional intelligence, emphasizing how important it is to bring emotional literacy into education and healthcare. He highlights some new programs like the social competence program and the self-science curriculum,
Okay.
which aim to teach kids essential emotional skills.
Oh, I love that. We need more of that.
Mhm.
It's not just about academic success, it's about well-being.
Absolutely. And it's not just for kids, right? Goleman suggests that helping people of all ages learn to manage their emotions is a form of disease prevention, which is a pretty radical idea.
Right. It makes you think about how much we could transform society if we really prioritized emotional intelligence.
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it?
It really is. It's like that ripple effect. A more emotionally intelligent world, that could have a positive impact on everything. Personal well-being, even global peace. It's inspiring.
Absolutely. So, as we move into the next part of our deep dive, we're going to take a closer look at those 5 domains of emotional intelligence and explore some specific strategies for developing these skills in our own lives. Stay tuned.
All right, so we've talked about the framework, the 5 domains.
Hmm.
Now let's unpack each one and see how they work. Where do we even start with all of this?
Well, Goleman says that self-awareness is like the foundation.
Okay.
It's about understanding your own emotional landscape, like what are you feeling?
Right.
Why are you feeling it? And how does that impact like your thoughts and your actions?
That sounds simple enough, but I think a lot of us just go through life not really paying attention to, like, what we're actually feeling. Is it really as simple as just paying more attention?
It's definitely practice, and it's not always easy. Goleman says the more self-aware we are, the less likely we are to just react impulsively. We can actually make conscious choices.
So you're not just like a puppet on a string.
Right. Exactly. People with high self-awareness, they have that inner compass.
I love that, an inner compass.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we cultivate this self-awareness then? Is it all about meditation, journaling, or are there other things we can do?
There are a lot of different techniques, but basically it's about just creating space to observe your emotions without judgment. Like not suppressing them,
Right.
but just acknowledging them. Mindfulness can be really helpful for this, like just taking a few deep breaths,
Okay.
noticing the sensations in your body.
So it's just like hitting the pause button before reacting, but it can be hard, when you're in the heat of the moment.
It can be, but it's a skill. And Goleman gives that amazing example of those Buddhist monks in Vietnam,
Yeah.
walking right through a war zone.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
They stayed so calm amidst all the chaos because they'd been practicing mindfulness for years.
Wow, that's next level.
Right. It shows us what's possible. And Goleman says anyone can develop this skill
Okay.
with practice. It's like, you're training your emotional muscles.
So we start with self-awareness. That's the foundation. What's next? How do we move from recognizing our emotions to actually managing them?
That's where the second domain comes in, managing emotions. And this doesn't mean denying your feelings. It's about finding healthy ways to express them
Right.
and regulating their intensity.
I keep thinking about that bus driver,
Mm-hmm.
He was a really positive guy, but I'm sure he had his bad days too. He just knew how to manage those emotions so they didn't ruin his whole day.
Exactly. People who are good at managing emotions, they can handle stress better, bounce back from setbacks. They don't have those emotional outbursts that can hurt relationships.
It makes me think about feedback, especially in the workplace. If you're able to manage your emotions, you can give feedback that's actually constructive, not just an attack.
And it works the other way, too. When you're receiving feedback, managing your emotions helps you stay open to it, even if it's hard to hear.
So you don't just get defensive.
Right. You can separate the message from the delivery. So we've got self-awareness, managing emotions, but what about motivation? Where does that fit in?
Yeah, where does that fit in?
That's the third domain, self-motivation. It's all about using your emotions to reach your goals. It's that drive that keeps you going, even when things get tough.
That fire in the belly.
Exactly. Goleman talks about emotional self-control, delaying gratification, staying optimistic even when things are tough. He talks about that flow state where you're so into something that time just flies by.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been there, that flow state. It's amazing. But it's not always easy to get there.
Right, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed or distracted.
Totally.
That's where these skills come in, managing your emotions, staying focused, tapping into that inner drive. That's what helps you achieve your goals, no matter what they are.
So it's like you're the master of your own motivation. You're not waiting for someone else to push you.
Exactly. So we've got self-awareness, managing emotions, self-motivation. What about understanding how other people feel?
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's the fourth domain, empathy. This is what we often call people skills. It's recognizing how other people are feeling, even when they don't say it out loud.
And Goleman says empathy is the root of compassion and altruism.
Right.
Right. And he brings up those examples of empathy in animals, again, like those monkeys.
It's amazing. It really challenges the idea that we're the only ones who can feel these complex emotions. And he ties this back to child development, how empathy develops in kids, and how it's connected to moral development.
So it's about more than just feeling bad for someone. It's about understanding their perspective.
Yeah.
And doing something about it.
Exactly.
I love that. It's like the difference between seeing someone drop their ice cream cone and feeling a little bad
Right.
versus really understanding the grief someone feels after losing a loved one. It's a whole other level of connection.
It is, and it's a skill you can develop. It starts with paying attention to those little cues like facial expressions,
Right.
body language, tone of voice.
Because you become an emotional detective.
Exactly. But it's not just about reading those cues. It's about responding with compassion and understanding, putting yourself in their shoes.
Yeah. Sounds like empathy is essential for good relationships.
Oh, absolutely. But relationships can be messy,
Yeah.
There's always going to be conflict. So how do we handle that?
That's the question.
Well, that's where that fifth domain comes in. Handling relationships. This is where all the other domains come together, It takes self-awareness,
Right.
managing your own emotions, empathy, even self-motivation to navigate all of that.
I remember Goleman talks about all the different communication styles.
Yeah.
And how important active listening is and, finding those win-win solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even gets into the differences between how men and women communicate, like that stonewalling thing we talked about.
Right. It's
And
all about recognizing those patterns and finding better ways to communicate.
absolutely. And, nobody's perfect at this stuff. Relationships are a learning process. We're all going to make mistakes. The key is to learn from them, apologize when you need to, and keep practicing those emotional skills.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. So we've covered the 5 domains: self-awareness, managing emotions, self-motivation, empathy, and handling relationships. What really stood out to you?
I'm struck by how interconnected they all are. They all work together. It's like a system.
I know, right? It's like different instruments and an orchestra all playing together to create this amazing symphony.
I love that analogy. And it makes me think that if you improve in one area, it probably helps the others too.
Yeah, like if you're more self-aware, you might naturally be better at handling relationships.
It's all connected. And that's the cool thing about emotional intelligence. It's not set in stone. We can keep learning and growing.
Absolutely.
So we've explored these 5 domains, but I'm curious about the practical stuff. How do we actually develop these skills? It's one thing to understand it all, but how do we put it into practice?
That's the big question, right? But the good news is, Goleman doesn't just leave us hanging. He gives us some actual strategies and techniques for boosting our EI.
Okay, good, because I'm all about actionable advice.
Yeah.
What were some of the key takeaways for you?
Well, one thing that stood out was the emphasis on mindfulness. Paying attention to our emotions in the moment without judgment, just observing them.
Mindfulness. Yeah, I've heard a lot about that, but I'm still not quite sure I get it. It all sounds a bit, I don't know, out there.
I know what you mean, but it's actually really practical. It's like, imagine hitting the pause button on your reactions. Instead of just reacting to something, you take a moment to observe your emotions, and then you can choose a better response.
So you're not just ruled by your emotions.
Right. And Goleman suggests all sorts of ways to practice mindfulness, like deep breathing, meditation, even just taking a few minutes to notice what's going on in your body and mind.
It's like you're training your mind to be more aware.
Exactly. And as you become more mindful, you'll start to see patterns in your emotional responses. Like maybe you realize certain situations always make you feel a certain way, or you have certain habits that aren't helpful.
It's like becoming more self-aware, right?
Right. And that brings us back to self-awareness. It's all connected. Remember that story about those monks in Vietnam walking through a war zone and staying completely calm?
Yeah, that was powerful.
They were able to do that because they'd practiced mindfulness for years. It's like emotional regulation at its finest.
I'm not sure I'll ever be that good at it.
Well, you don't have to be a monk, but we can all benefit from practicing mindfulness.
Okay, so mindfulness is great for self-awareness and managing emotions. But what about empathy? How do we get better at that?
Yeah, how do we strengthen that empathy muscle?
Well, Goleman suggests things like actively listening to people without interrupting or giving advice, really trying to understand their point of view, even if you disagree.
Oh man, that's hard, especially when you're in the middle of an argument.
It is, but it's a good practice. He even suggests reading fiction.
Reading fiction.
Yeah. When you get lost in a story, you're basically putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Huh. That's cool. I never thought of it that way.
It's a great way to develop empathy. And when it comes to managing relationships, Goleman talks about clear communication, setting boundaries, being assertive.
Finding that balance between passive and aggressive, right.
Right. Standing up for yourself while still respecting others.
Goleman describes people with high EI as having emotional radar. Like
Yeah.
they just know what other people are feeling.
Oh yeah, that's attunement. They're picking up on those subtle cues, the body language, the tone of voice, like that old man on the train comforting the laborer. He just knew what that guy needed.
It was a beautiful example of empathy. It's like we all have that potential for emotional brilliance within us. So after this deep dive into working with emotional intelligence, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
Emotional intelligence isn't just a nice to have. It's essential for navigating life. And the best part is, we can all get better at it.
It's like a superpower we can all develop. I love that.
Me too. And while we've just scratched the surface here, hopefully this has inspired our listeners to learn more.
There's a whole world of resources out there, right?
Absolutely. Books, articles, workshops, you name it.
Developing emotional intelligence, it's a journey, but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings our deep dive to a close. Thanks for joining us.
Keep diving deep and keep learning.